Hello, my name is Michael Krawitz, and I represent the Cannabis Museum Project. It's a project that I've been working on for about 10 years, and a project of my heart and my love and my life. As a child of the auction business, growing up, I was immersed in antiques and collectibles, but all I knew of cannabis or marijuana was what I had learned basically from Cheech and Chong movies. And it wasn't until, as an adult, becoming a disabled veteran and doing some research, finding the word cannabis and finding the huge history connected to that word that is sometimes very difficult to find when you start out using the word marijuana. I found a wealth of artifacts and bits and pieces of history that are very little known to the average person out there, or even some of the people that work in cannabis medicine or in cannabis regulation and tax and regulate campaigns. So I've found myself a project of something that ties together my youth and my passion as an adult to bring forward the artifacts of this great history of this plant that goes back eons, and allow people access to this history, both in the field working in medical cannabis, so that they can more effectively show how these things were used before they were taken off the market when we had good experience, but also for people that are just trying to understand the culture. I found that these artifacts give you a lens to understand human history, and you can learn more about yourself by learning how we've interacted with cannabis through the eons. So that's basically who I am. I grew up in the auction business, and I'm a disabled veteran who's now is semi-retired, working more increasingly on this project to bring in artifacts and help others find artifacts of the cannabis history. And we have several here before us today. I would like to take a minute or so to show you each one of these and explain, a little bit about how this object is of interest and how it tells some of the story, that great story of cannabis. I think I'll start with this one. It's a good one to start with. The Marijuana Farmers, Hemp Cults and Cultures, Jack Frazer, and it's a book written on hemp paper. I think you can get a good picture of it there. Jack Frazer is an author who actually doesn't live very far from here. He's in West Virginia, and still lives there today, and writes and works on environmental issues and trying to raise awareness about hemp and not only the history of hemp, but how hemp can be used today to help meet some of our environmental deadlines, you might call them. Jack has taken the time to go back all the way to the very early history of cannabis use, and bringing together that and some of the early tests of hemp back again before it was taken off the market, under racist reasons. And it's a great book. Jack Frazer, living icon. One of Jack Herer's icons and mentors in the writing of his Emperor Wears No Clothes. And he's got a great quote on the back from Harry Anslinger, who's talking in Esquire magazine in 1968 about a Polish immigrant who was complaining about his plants being seized because they were going to be his next year's long pajamas, and actually talking about how it was such a great fiber. Harry Anslinger's problem wasn't the use of it as a fiber, it was the use of it by what he called the lower classes. Wasn't afraid to show his racist roots. Here we have a couple of artifacts from my own personal collection, and these were actually just picked up recently by myself when I was over in Vienna, Austria, at the United Nations, attending drug policy meetings connected with the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, a United Nations function that works on drug policy at that level. And while I was in Vienna, I had the opportunity to take a couple minutes and go to a couple bookstores, and found this on the shelf, an original print from two different sources showing the cannabis plant and describing its anatomy. And I think that these books are just fantastic. These are actually a little bit newer than a lot of the botanical prints that I've located, being around the turn of the century, early 1900s. But they go back just so far, and they are such a great record of mankind's understanding of the plants, because in the early days of maybe the 1500s, they would make little mistakes about the sexing of the plant and stuff like that, because they really didn't understand. They didn't understand how they could have a male and the female of that plant species. They weren't quite on the mark yet, understanding the botany of it. And from that point on, late 1500s, all the way till the early 1900s, the way a doctor would understand the use of a product was that it would be a product that was made from a plant, and they would see a photo, or in this case, a drawing of the plant, and it would give a description of how that plant was used, what part of it was used, and how it was used. And then the doctor would make decisions about the medicine from there. In the early 1900s, we lost our connection to the plants, and drugs became patent medicines, but they're all still, at least very, very high percentage of the drugs, the medicines that we take today, are still drawn from knowledge about plants, or drawn directly from plants, or synthetic copies of plants. And it would be really nice for the human race to get back to this knowledge base of how cannabis was used, and all these plants, how they differentiate and what part of the plant was used. I think that is a piece of information that the human race really needs. And these botanical books are a touchstone to that past. Next up, we have a set of medical textbooks, which is a very good example of the information that was available before the Marijuana Tax Act. These were written in the 1920s, one for a medical textbook, Materia Medica for nurses, and the other one, your classic textbook on Materia Medica for doctors, medical doctors. And these books would have been your standard issue book that you would have carried around in medical school if you were going to medical school in the 1920s, or nursing school in the 1920s. And if you're, again, a caregiver or a medical patient or a doctor working in these issues of medical cannabis, searching out one of these early books. This one is by Maximilian, publisher, and it's Bloomgarten's textbook, Blumgarten, Bloomgarten's textbook. And these books list the indications for cannabis at the time that were known, and the indications for use for medical treatment. And also, especially the nurse's book, goes into quite a bit of detail about what you should expect from the cannabis patient as far as a reaction to the medicine. Very, very useful, especially since even today, we haven't quite gotten back to the knowledge base that we've lost. Even with all the experimentation and all the dispensaries all around the country and even around the world, there's still some information, I think, to be gained from the expertise that was lost by the Marijuana Tax Act and the subsequent years of decay of these classic works of Materia Medica. So this one is Bloomgarten. I highly recommend seeking out a copy. Some of these books can be found actually quite easily by going on Amazon.com. I think we have some links on our website, medicalcannabis.com, where you can actually go buy some of the older books that are still available in wider numbers, like Bob Randall's books. But just by simply going to Amazon.com or going to Abe Books or even eBay or any of the online sources that are larger, you can find some of these older books rather inexpensively. And again, as a patient or caregiver, it's indispensable information, but as an activist also, it's very useful to get the information straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And this is a good reference book.